Frakash was a garden gnome who thought magic was boring. Other garden gnomes entertained themselves by turning hideous people into frogs, or sending goblins at night under the beds of children who had exceeded their weekly tantrum quotas. To Frakash, such pursuits seemed mind-numbing. Memorizing reams of magic spells to be recited at absurd moments was not Frakash's idea of fun. Like all his kin, Frakash owned a copy of Mastering the Art of Mischief of every kind, but his copy sat neglected on the shelf. Frakash was a wholly different kind of gnome. Even the thought of crossing marshy bogs to charge defenseless dragons seemed futile to him. Whenever his gnome friends came to him suggesting a fair maiden rescue mission, his response was the same. "Why bother? Let the dragon keep his fair maiden. Aye! These princesses are so hard to please. The dragon deserves what is coming to him." Although his friends thought him slothful, Frakash ignored them and occupied himself with gardening instead. He enjoyed planting tomatoes and tulips in unexpected places. One beautiful sunny day, Frakash was weeding in a garden that always needed oodles of work. It was the garden that Layla liked to call Layla's garden. Frakash would observe her when she sat on the sun deck, drinking a cup of coffee or working on her laptop. She was a quiet sort that rarely said anything, but when she did, it was sharp as an axe. Layla was nothing like Frakash's gnome friends. She worked as a computer programmer in a software development company and would say words that Frakash didn't understand, like server, upload, and database. Layla would sit outside for hours, focused on her laptop, tapping on the keyboard with piercing attention. Every once in a while, her breathing would slow down, her body would stop moving, and a fierce look would appear in her eyes. Frakash wished he had a magical crystal to show him the thoughts forming inside Layla's head. One day, Frakash finished his work, overheard Layla talking with her husband. "I love my work, but I feel a dark menace lurking underneath the surface. Somebody among my coworkers, darling, are you listening? Is trying to sabotage me with donuts. It is as if an evil spell has been cast upon me. Every few days somebody brings free donuts to the office. I try to ignore them, but it is as if I am possessed by a sugar seduction fiend. I can hear the greasy calorie bomb saying with an alluring voice, 'Come grab a donut and stuff it in your mouth.'" Frakash's ears perked up as he heard a rumble coming out of Layla's stomach. Layla swiftly changed the subject. She bragged about her latest victory at work. "Yesterday, I presented my new design ideas to the team. The boss loved it and said that my design was the most brilliant design he has heard in months." Frakash felt awestruck. He decided to go to his hut to ponder the events of the day. Unable to sleep, wow, Layla uses logic to solve problems at her job. Instead of memorizing the same tired old list of magic spells that have been passed down the generations for thousands of years, Layla gets to come up with something new. Irresistible urge to visit Layla's place of work overcame Frakash. He tried to convince himself that an adventure would not suit his temperament, and that routine and sameness was the foundation rock of his being. But a flood of yearning had been unleashed. That night, Frakash used magic to sneak into Layla's backpack. In the morning, everything went according to his plan. As Layla walked past the large glass front door of her workplace, the adventure had already started for Frakash, and his heart was spinning like a twirling dervish. Frakash managed to get through the security without a problem. As soon as Layla walked through the large glass doors, Frakash jumped out of the backpack and into the front hallway of the office of the Geekmeisters. "Wow! I made it! I am here! Frakash jumped up and down with excitement, and as he looked around his new surroundings, he was awestruck by what he saw. The walls were perfectly white, not a single smudge or speck to be seen. The earth was covered with a plush, fuzzy, light blue material that was pleasant to touch. Frakash wished he could roll face down in it. He reasoned he didn't even need to wear boots. Everything was clean. There was no dirt, no worm, no crawlies. The Geekmeister sat in perfectly shaped boxes. There was no smell either, not of manure, not of dirt, not of anything. Frakash could feel the relief in his sinuses as they smelt nothing for the very first time in their tired existence. "Oh, this place is heaven," Frakash thought to himself as he closed his eyes to soak up the moment. Alas, Frakash's rapture came to a hasty end. A commanding voice descended upon him from above. "May I help you?" Frakash encountered the ever-vigilant and always watchful office manager called Jenny. In no time, the stowaway garden refugee found himself being unceremoniously kicked out of the office. Frakash was stricken with a thunderbolt of rage. He never felt such anger in any of his past gnome lives, wishing he could lay flat on his stomach and pound his fists and feet on the ground like he saw Lila's children do sometimes. Dark shadow eclipsed his heart. "I belong with the Geekmeisters. I want to be one of them." An inner voice rumbled through. "No giant glass door, no office manager, and no security system can keep me out." For the first time in his life, acts of mischief of a dark kind entered his fantasies. Frakash surprised himself with an impulsive act. Frakash stood outside the giant glass door, observing Geekmeisters walking in and out of the office. He noticed that they wore t-shirts with mysterious words printed on them. "Maybe my shirt gave me away," reasoned Frakash. "I need one of those Geekmeisters t-shirts." Frakash followed the one whom the Geekmeisters called James into the men's washroom. Once in there, he cornered him. Using his gardener muscles and 3 magical spells, Frakash forced James to take off his t-shirt. Feverishly, Frakash ran out of the men's washroom and tailgated one of the Geekmeisters as he entered through the great glass door. This time, Frakash knew not to stand in the hallway, looking mesmerized by the antiseptically linear world. Hastily, he ran into the first unoccupied, perfectly shaped box. Frakash looked at the computer sitting on the desk and felt thrilled to get a chance to try programming. He began to stare intently at the screen, the same way he had seen Layla do while sitting on her sun deck. There were many words on the screen that Frakash couldn't understand, but he maintained his intense gaze and squeezed his facial muscles. After a while, aghast, he discovered that the lines of code contained violent language that Frakash disapproved of. He changed things around. Trigger became happy event, alert became joyful tidbit, and kill process became whistle cheerfully while you wait. But after only a few minutes, the machine became angry and began making strange noises. Frightened, he fled a few meters away into a dark and deserted corner of the office. Frakash came upon a large gray beast standing all alone. He figured this was the Logic Kingdom's dragon. The gray dragon was making a menacing, humming sound. Frakash was afraid. Poor Geekmeisters. They probably don't know how to deal with him. "I will thrash this beast into obedience in no time." Frakash began reciting the dragon submission chant. "Foo, foo, 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 gafu!" And then charged forwards with an absolute certainty to grab the dragon's scales around his eyes. The unexpected happened. The dragon began to shake and flash with blinding lights that didn't burn. Instead of spitting fire, the dragon spat sheets of paper. Frakash froze with shock. The paper piled on top of him and gave him tiny little cuts all over his body. Frakash was mortified. This dragon charging didn't work. Worse than that, his body was getting mutilated. With a genius spark, the bushwhacking spell came to him. Ai fi bayui! Ai fi bayui! Out of my way! Boom! His feet lifted off the floor, and the paper slid off his body. I am so glad some of the gnome magic spells still work here. As soon as Frakash's feet touched the ground, he began to run towards the sunny corner of the other end of the office. Nothing made sense to Frakash in this place. I don't know what I'm doing here. Even my boring magic spells don't always work in this world. That is when it hit Frakash. I have been approaching everything the wrong way. Magic doesn't matter in this world. It's all about logic. I need to go through a magic deprivation phase. He walked down the hallway with confident steps, assured that his new attitude will get him what his heart desired. Frakash peeked into a meeting room, and there he saw a group of tired geekmeisters working vigorously on perfecting a dizzying array of designs. Frakash joined them and began to listen in. Frakash didn't understand what the geekmeisters were talking about, and over time he gathered that the geekmeisters were talking about designing something called a knowledge base. The one that the geekmeisters called Mike got up to show his design ideas. To Frakash's amazement, Mike began to draw a design that mimicked trees. Although Frakash didn't understand everything in the diagram, he understood trees and understood the idea that a tree has branches and leaves. Finally, something that I know oodles about. Frakash jumped up from his chair and onto the table and said what he was waiting to say all along. Listen up, people. I know the perfect way to solve the problem. Everybody stopped talking, and they were all staring at Frakash. This was the first time that any of the geekmeisters noticed Frakash, for until then he was hidden under the table. They were all too surprised to see somebody so short wearing a long beard and a pointy hat. Maybe he's a recent immigrant from a faraway land with weird customs, thought Mike to himself. Maybe he suffers from a genetic defect, thought Doug. Maybe he's been recently divorced and the bad grooming is a symptom of this depression, thought Desiree. All three geekmeisters had completed their cultural diversity sensitivity training as mandated by their company. They had been coached on the perils of discriminating against anybody because of his or her culture, race, gender, physical appearance, class, educational background, manners, or intelligence. Since none of them wished to lose their job, all three geekmeisters acted as if seeing an 11-inch guy with a pointy hat standing on the table was perfectly ordinary. Frakash proceeded to talk about his idea. Trees are beautiful. They are tall. They are green. But shrubs, although less visually impressive, are far more useful. Shrubs are woody little trees that have a bazillion wild branches, and with so many leaves that are too numerous to count. Their leaves don't fall, and a good pruning always does them good. The geekmeister's eyes lit up. The one that the geekmeisters called Dog got up and said, "Aha! That is a brilliant idea. What the new guy is saying is that we need a structure that is more flexible than the standard tree design, yet resilient enough so that it can handle large mass of data. The shrub design." I think what the new guy meant was, Doug got up from his chair and began to draw a group of designs that were marvelous. "Isn't this what you meant, new fellow? By the way, what is your name?" Frakash introduced his name to the group, and although he didn't understand most of what Doug drew on the whiteboard, he claimed that the shrub design was his idea. The geekmeisters assumed that Frakash was a new employee, shook his hand, wished him luck in his new job, and thanked him for his contribution to the meeting. Frakash achieved a tiny morsel of approval and sensed a feeling of belonging. Warm fuzzes were flowing through his blood, and he could feel his cheeks burning. Now super confident, Frakash peered into the meeting room next door. There he found a group of Geekmeisters playing a video game. Frakash was willing to take on another adventure. He grabbed one of the game consoles and moved the little knobs around. He realized that each time he moved a knob or pressed a button, something happened on the screen to a fictional character that he controlled. The three Greek Geekmeisters sitting in the room were surprised to see an 11-inch being standing on a chair with a pointy hat. All three had taken the cultural diversity sensitivity training as well, and said nothing. Oh, this is even more fun than drawing designs, thought Frakash. The objective of the game was to defeat as many enemies while collecting as much loot. To Frakash, this was a familiar territory. He was a professional loot hoarder by training. Frakash felt grateful for the first time in his life for the dragon charging training he received in Gnome School. All the other Geekmeisters looked impressed with him. Sam gave Frakash a high five and said, "Wow, dude, you totally creamed them." Frakash felt happier than he had ever been. He was home. Feeling happy as happy can be, Frakash decided to explore the office some more and walked into the stationery room. While looking at all the beautiful boxes, he encountered two beings with sharp teeth that terrified him. Frakash had heard about vampires and werewolves, but wasn't sure if that is what he encountered in the stationery room. He prayed that he wouldn't get bitten by either creature, because he had no desire to transform to anything other than a Geekmeister. He wanted to use a magical spell badly, but didn't want to break his vow. He felt paralyzed without magic and didn't know what to do. Then he remembered something he read about garlic keeping vampires away, so he ran out as fast as he could into the kitchen, hoping to find some to protect him. In the kitchen, Frakash found a box full of donuts sitting on the counter. That dazzling sight made him forget all about garlic and vampires and presented him with a new dilemma. Which donut to eat? Each one was unique and special. Frakash closed his eyes and chose a random donut. Frakash raised the donuts close to his lips. He could smell the sweetness in his nostrils. When the donut touched his lips, he could feel sugar grains rubbing gently against his taste buds. Frakash licked his lips and took a bite. The taste was hypnotic. The minute the donut left his mouth into his stomach, Frakash wanted another one, and then another one, and then another one. In a few minutes, Frakash surprised himself by eating the whole box of donuts. He fell on the counter into a food coma. Frakash felt drowsy when he woke up from a sleep. Frakash staggered out of the kitchen, realizing that eating a whole box of donuts was a foolish idea. While walking in the hallway, he passed one of the perfect boxes where Geekmeisters were laboring. Frakash decided to observe them from a distance and watch what Geekmeister was doing at his computer. The Geekmeisters typed the word ihath makes baba ganush into a box on the computer screen, and in a clickety-click, a video played. In the video, there was a woman hugging an eggplant. She looked serene but disturbed. Suddenly, a peacock showed up and began to stab the eggplant with a knife. Everything seemed strange, yet normal. The woman in the video looked troubled but resigned. There was a pained smirk on her face. Frakash felt a rush of mysterious anxieties scuttle through his veins. He started to think that perhaps he was still dreaming. That is when he heard Lila screaming down the hallway. Frakash had never heard Lila scream before, yet he recognized her voice. Frakash rushed towards the kerfuffle to find that James standing shirtless and looking angry. "Go back to the kingdom of landmines, which is where you belong," yelled James at Layla. Layla yelled back, "You ignorant twit! I do not come from the kingdom that is now ravaged by landmines. I come from the kingdom that is ravaged by rooftop snipers." To obtuse, thick brains like you, it is all the same, but it is not. Go get an education." That is when James noticed Frakash and became angry. "I am certain that it is you who brought this terrorist into our office." Layla noticed Frakash as well, and was surprised to see him standing in front of her. But she was too busy yelling at James, "You dim-witted toad, that is not a terrorist, that is my garden gnome." James retorted back in complete disbelief. "A garden gnome? Look at him. He has a long beard and is wearing a turban. He must be a Bin Laden follower. He is here to corrupt the corporate culture of our democratic country from the inside. People like you are so broad-minded that you are not able to tell the difference between right and wrong." Once more, Frakash didn't understand what Layla and James were talking about. But looking at James' shirtless body, he had a suspicion that it had something to do with him stealing his t-shirt. Frakash stood on a nearby desk and cleared his throat. "Please stop yelling. I'm sorry I stole your t-shirt. I'm sorry I tied you up in the washroom. I don't understand the things that you said about me, but I'm just a garden gnome who is tired of living in a fairy tale land. Once I got a taste of the brainy radiance of your office, I wanted to become a computer programmer, same as you. Please take your t-shirt back." James took his shirt back and grumbled while walking away. Layla composed herself, looked at Frakash intensely. "Why didn't you tell me that you wanted to become a computer programmer?" Frakash answered sheepishly, "I thought you would laugh at me. Besides, you never talk with me in the garden, so how do you expect me to walk up to you and ask you for a favor?" "Well, until today, I assumed you were deaf, mute, and static. It never occurred to me to try to talk with you." Frakash was puzzled. "Static? Static? Who do you think makes your garden flourish every spring?" "I thought it was my husband that worked in the garden," came the reply. Frakash threw his arms into the air. "Your garden flourishes despite your husband, not because of him." Layla felt an uneasy sensation in her stomach. The grumbling from her intestines made her quickly change the subject. That evening, Layla promised Frakash that she would take him to her office every day to teach him how to develop his logical muscles. In exchange, he promised her that any time she picked up a donut, he would rescue the sugary delight and eat it.